Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, busking outside of your local Starbucks with an amplifier powered by a car battery, or else a scrappy upstart, soliciting Venmo donations on an Instagram Live, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the second Friday of August 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Banzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Banzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Manuel who drove a Mazda 6 with like an Avenged Sevenfold rear window decal, and who was always trying to sell you bootleg tickets to something he called a foam party. And old Manuel would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Banzoogle. Banzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to banzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. The first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to support the show over there. If you're not in a place where you can support the show in that way, I totally get it. You can still help us out in a couple ways for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. Text them an episode that you dig and see if we can get someone else like-minded listening. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. It was a pleasure to talk with Taylor again, and I hope you enjoy our chat. Our guest this week is Taylor Goldsmith, the primary songwriter and singer in Dawes, the Los Angeles rock quartet that has spent the last decade and a half releasing a flurry of critically acclaimed albums and touring the country to a devoted fan base. The band got its start around a series of salon-like musical parties hosted by producer Jonathan Wilson that included the Black Crowes' Chris Robinson, the Heartbreakers' Benmont Tench, Conor Oberst, and many others. Wilson eventually produced the band's first album, and it garnered enough attention to get them out of LA and onto the road, where they've been mainstays on the club and theater circuit ever since. They've recorded for ATO, Loose Music, Mercury, and Rounder Records. They've appeared on Jimmy Kimmel, The Colbert Show, The Late Show with David Letterman, and also on NBC's drama Parenthood as themselves. Outside of Dawes, Taylor has played as a session guitarist on albums by Jackson Browne, John Fogerty, Dave Rawlings, Sarah Watkins, and many others. He's written songs for albums by Brandon Flowers of The Killers, Robert Ellis, and Conor Oberst. American Songwriter has said that Dawes have always found a way to turn the triumph and tenacity of rock music into an experience that rings with both personality and poignancy. And NPR has described the band's sound as California folk rock that never bothers to hide its big, beating, bleeding heart. Last month, I had the chance to catch up with Taylor on the phone to hear about their latest album, Misadventures of Doomscroller. Taylor Goldsmith of Dawes, thanks for being back on the podcast. A lot has changed since the last time you were on the show for you, man. You're a parent now, and not that we're going to sit here and talk parenting tips all day, but I think we can at least talk about it in this show to the context of, how much has your creative life changed in the last 18 months now that you're an old man?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure you can relate to this. It basically it just changes. I don't know, but it changes the workflow, it changes the commitment level, it changes the way the songs come out. And what I mean by that, I guess, is before, if I had time off, like a week or so, I would just kind of lounge around and read and watch movies and probably spend a little too much time on my phone. And then if the song showed up, great. And now it's like, this kid has a nap from 11 to maybe 2, definitely 1. And I have to get right to it. And so that kind of, I'm not writing songs right. I'm not trying to write songs right now. And so some have happened in that sort of twilight, accidental 5 a.m. hangout with him or something where we're both in his corral. But otherwise I'm not really seeking it. But when I do, it has to be much more intentional. And I found that with talking to a lot of artists, that when you get to a certain point, you there's no more fucking around really. And it's just I have 20 minutes. I'm going to apply those 20 minutes. And it's some of my friends, because of that thinking, say they write more than ever, even though they have kids in their life.
Yes. And well, if all that happens is that it knocks some of the phone time out of your hands, then good. That's stuff to do.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love that feeling now. I'll wake up, leave that shit plugged in, go hang out with him, and we're getting all the way through breakfast, all the way through park time, all the way through so much of the day, and it's that's still plugged in next to my nightstand, and I can't say that's ever been the case before. So that part's pretty freeing and pretty cool.
Totally. Do you feel a little bit though, would you be able to do this kind of work and get an efficient 20 minutes in? Had you done this much earlier in life, or did you need that time in your 20s and early 30s to learn how to learn the ropes, and that takes a little bit longer?
I think, as a writer, yeah, I think there's an aspect of it sometimes where I feel like the songs that feel strongest to me, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but also feel the easiest, it's not as hard anymore, and that it sometimes freaks me out, where I'm a little bit why wasn't that harder? Why wasn't I afraid? Why wasn't I in that zone? And that's probably a big contributing factor to why our new album sounds so a little bit freakier. But just because I wanted to get back to that scary feeling of I don't know what I'm doing exactly. But now, writing a love song, I I get into I like to think that they're still fresh and they're still I'm still trying to tread new ground. But like you said, I know how to do it now. So yeah, it does, like, that's probably makes the 20 minutes that I can dedicate a little more efficient. But I will also say, I also needed those years in my 20s to just be very self-involved. I wasn't aware of that at the time. But I think, I don't know, I think you and I might have talked about this before, but I think there's something about being a young songwriter where you just assume people want to hear about your bullshit. And I think that's true. But I think you get to a certain age where I'm not going to just sit down to dinner with a bunch of strangers and be like, here's what's going on in my personal life, the way that I probably would have at 22. And had a kid come along then, obviously there's a lot of amazing parents that are young people. So this isn't a generalization. I'm talking about myself. But where I was at, I would have been really at odds with, like, how do I do both of these things? Because I still am very much the main character in my story. And now, having a kid at 36, I'm not the main character in my story, and I love it. And it's very freeing, and it's very, I've never felt better.
It strikes me doing this podcast. Obviously I talk to a lot of songwriters, and a lot of people in their 20s and early 30s will always tell me, I do songwriting as therapy, like to get this out there. Right. I think that's fine. And that's something that I've done. It sounds like it's something you've done as well. But that being said, I feel like it's talked about in that sense as if that is the only channel through which you can make art, when in fact I could not imagine a more narrow channel than a single human being's experience, right? So
yeah, totally. And I also think it is like, you can be a really great self-involved songwriter, like airing your dirty laundry, talking about personal details of breakups. Not only is that cool, it's actually important. I think, like, we all respond to those songs. There's a reason why they're so effective. But I think that that you really see the true merit of a songwriter when they graduate into that second phase. Like, if you listen to a lot of early Elvis Costello, maybe he's a weird example, but he's the one I'm picking, I guess. Like, it is very much like me. Here's my life. Here's my observations. And then by the time you get into his, like, back 30 albums or whatever it is, it's very much occupying the perspective of others. And I think that is such a massive challenge. And it's really hard. Like Joni does it, Dylan does it. The greats do it. And where you can write as you for however many years you need to. And then because you've worked up that skill set, then you could start writing as not yourself and still have it be just as expressive of your perspective. And as is still as much of an opportunity for me as a listener to get to know who you are singularly. Right. That's hard as hell.
It is, because another maxim that I think is true about writing is that idea of, like, write what you know. But what you're talking about here is a level of kind of like a veteran or journeyman level of being in a place where just because you're writing about a character or just because you're writing about someone else doesn't mean you're not writing about something that you know. Like, you can still know it, Oh yeah. Like,
I listen to Sam Stone by John Prine, and I feel like I'm getting very clear insight into John Prine. This song's not about him. But it's very representative of how his mind works. I feel the same way about, like, French Inhaler by Warren Zevon. I feel like that gives me I know so much about his relationship with Los Angeles through that song, even though I'm pretty sure that song's about Marilyn Monroe and Norman Mailer. So that kind of thing, to me, it's almost like if that doesn't click in, I don't mean to make rules, but, like, there are those writers that, like, they're in their late 30s, early 40s, even later, and if they're still writing about the heartbreak and the breakup, I find that I gravitate towards it less. Maybe that's just me, but I feel like it's almost like if you want to stay vibrant, if you want to stay, if you want to continue to have something to offer, you have to, like, you can't be going back to that same well. I mean, you can, and I do, but, like, I think it's a nuanced relationship, and it can't be like, I mean, our first 4 albums are just like songs of longing, breakup songs, a couple outliers, but that's it. And I think if I was still doing that now, I think it would almost be awkward. Like there are bands, famous bands, and I don't want to trash bands, but like bands in their 50s, and there's still these like, oh man, this after class, they're trying to talk to this one girl, and I'm like, what? Like I just feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's gnarly.
Yeah.
Well, so what's kind of interesting here is you would expect someone that's doing what you said you had all this time in the world, you could really focus on yourself. And now obviously both having a kid and also just getting older as an artist, not only do you have less, you have to have more focused work time and you're kind of focusing on other stuff. So one would think that back in the day, we would have had a bunch of 9-minute songs, 6-minute songs, this, that, and the other. And that right now we'd be getting like the 2.5-minute, very concise pop gems. Obviously it's the other way around. I've always really loved about Dawes and your writing is how concise the editing has been. Talk to me about this new record, because
this one.
I know. I look at the back of this record and it's like, 3 songs on each side, a 9-minute song, 2 7-minute songs. What happened, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think when we were making a few records ago, this record of ours called Passwords, I started, and I was way behind the curve on this, but I started to really feel like I was not necessarily understanding, but responding to jazz music in a way that I never had. I would listen and I would admire, but I also felt like that's beyond my capabilities as a listener, let alone a musician. But finally I was able to like find a way in and just enjoy it. And not that I didn't enjoy it before, but you know what I'm saying? I just kind of couldn't do anything with it. And I couldn't stop listening to this particular Wayne Shorter record, Speak No Evil. And that led me to everything else of his, Native Dancer, his time with Miles Davis. That opened up the Miles thing. That opened up Herbie. All these things one thing kept leading to another. And I was always like blown away by how, the most obvious example for, people that, if their jazz experience is limited to Urban Outfitters, then they'll know what I'm talking about. But like a record like Kind of Blue, where it's only 5 songs. And because of that, I find that it's actually like, even though it's some of the most heavy playing, and they go pretty far out in some respects, it's pretty digestible.
Yes.
I feel the same way about like a record like Dark Side of the Moon, where even though it's 10 tracks, technically, several of those are like segues, or there's no words, or it's just this, it's one song cut in half. And so when you really like look at Dark Side of the Moon, it's really only 5 songs. And to me, that there's no coincidence there with that being true, and also the fact that that's one of the most successful albums of all time. I think it's easy to listen to it and wrap your head around it. And so like, not that I was like think this was my answer to like, how do I make music more accessible? Because I obviously wouldn't say that about our record. It's not our more accessible record, but I do feel like these examples suggest that we all have the patience for it. We all have the ears for it. People want to talk about short attention spans, and part of me is like, I think that's just bullshit. I think that way of thinking is developed by people who are operating out of fear. Yes. And sure, if you want to sell 1 trillion copies and get something on the radio, yeah, keep it fast, keep it 2 minutes, keep the chorus happening under 20 seconds. Sure. But should that be your guiding principle when you're writing all of your songs? Should that be your guiding principle when you're making a record? Right. I would hope not. And so I thought like, people deserve more credit than they get. They can handle a 9-minute song if that's what I want to write. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier, like, how do I get to a place where I feel as in over my head as I did when I made our first record, when I was like standing behind the mic feeling like, I don't know if I have this inside me. And that helped. And I don't, this might just be me, but I like to believe that if someone does like that album, it's because they can sense that on some level. Mm-hmm. And that it feels very much here as well. I think like this was peak COVID when we recorded this, and it was peak. It was early COVID when I wrote most of it. And so this idea of like touring coming back was really up in the air. And so it just felt like, let's just do this on our terms, whatever the hell we want. And we've always talked about this kind of album. Let's just do it. I have the songs that I think I can develop in that way, and if they can, if these lyrics and if these sections can sustain that, and if we can figure out a way to keep it interesting, then let's really do it. And so in that sense, we kind of had a mission statement. We wanted to like, instead of minimize, like you're saying, like be economical, which has always been important to us, or I'm sure to most songwriters. Like, what else can I shave off? What other fat can I trim? This felt more like, what else can this handle? What else can this sustain? Can I like, with a song like Everything Is Permanent, I had the meat of it. I had the verses and choruses written. And then I was like, I want to put some like freak out outer space solo in here where we can change feels, does this major minor thing and odd bars. We both solo, the keyboardist Lee and I. And then I did that, and then it's like, okay, that worked. And now, like, can it handle an outro? And so I tried this outro of do you really need to cry or be seen crying? And then we try that, and like, that's working too. So it was less guided by minimalism, more guided by maximalism.
Yeah. What did the band have to do to support that? Because more than any other songwriter in this space that I can think of, your songwriting is identified with and informed by this band that's been very stable over the last decade and a half, and they add such a personality to all of it. You're also a player in the band, so that's a weird aspect of it as well. But what did the band have to do to how did the band have to change to interpret these songs?
Well, the cool thing was I almost feel like I'm not patting myself on the back. If anything, this is overdue. But in a way, I feel like these songs freed them, you know? I think that if you listen to any Lee Pardini solo music, mm-hmm. it's freakish. I mean, he's the greatest musician I've ever played with. I know I'm in his band, so I'm biased, but I would venture to say if I wasn't in a band with him, I'd say the same thing. I mean, he's incredible. And that, you know, when I'm showing him a new song, like, hey, I wrote this song called Crack the Case or you know, whatever it is, Didn't Fix Me. Like, I'm really proud of those songs, but they don't give him an opportunity to really let loose. Right. And I don't write for those reasons. They wouldn't want me to. Right. But with these songs, it was like Griffin and Lee particularly have these jazz chops. Wiley's an amazing bass player, but he just doesn't go there with it. Mm-hmm. They have these chops that just like, they're always holding back because the song calls for it, and they're very responsible players in that sense. Right. And with these songs, it was like, actually just like find your ceiling, like seek out true excellence, you know. Yeah. And I find that, I mean, I like the way I play guitar, but I don't play jazz like those guys do, and I don't have those like flying around chops. Yeah. But I did feel like we all had this new permission on this album. I think so. Every record we've ever made, frankly, a contemporary record that we responded to, one of those big categories of like what we're looking for is restraint, and how much of a band is withholding. So much of my favorite guitar playing after, you know, the year 2010 or something, or so much of my favorite records, like, it's always like, wow, these guys could have done something, but they didn't. Like, and that's and it's also very much a thing in LA, particularly, like, wow, that drummer didn't even hit the snare drum, you know, like stuff like that. Yeah, totally. And it's very delicate and it's very beautiful. Yeah. But it felt like, fuck that. Let's like really go the other way and like and push ourselves to our limits. I think, I mean, I don't think I'll ever really sound anything like him because it's such a different thing. But a big thing that I felt like I got permission from with this record was discovering Frank Zappa for the first time. Oh, really? And really responding to it, like all the eras. Yes. And falling deeply in love with him as a musician, and like that felt like, you know, watching interviews with him. And he would talk about that, like when people would, because they were so cruel to him in interviews, like, why do you think you're not more popular? Why do you think you're so weird or whatever? And he's like, I think that people are afraid of excellence. And I coming from me, that would sound shitty, and I wouldn't want to say that because that's not how I feel. But watching him say it was really inspiring, because it's like, yeah, it's okay to seek your limits.
Yes.
That's what Otis did. That's what like so many of our heroes did. And ever since I, as a young kid, fell in love with the Nirvanas and the Pavements and the REMs, which I'm still deeply in love with. I always thought like, oh, you're supposed to hold back. You're supposed to maybe even not be that accomplished. That's kind of charming.
Right.
And so we've been sort of like, it's almost like we've been developing these muscles and then putting on big baggy clothes. And it's like, you know what? We put a lot of work into this. Let's do this. Let's play our instruments.
Right. I mean, something I always think about is when those bands came out, Pavement, Nirvana, and all that. Well, who did they replace in like the national kind of cultural focus? They replaced all of these like glam rock and metal guys who were virtuosos on their instruments.
Like Slash, like monsters, and that went away, and it became about the opposite of like, oh, it's actually cool not to know that much about your instrument. Not that those bands didn't; they had beautiful voices on their their records, but you know what I'm saying?
No, I do. It's interesting the way you guys are going with this. It's I think you've tapped into something there. I think you've tapped into what people consider to be a truism, but might be wrong. The idea that people just have short attention spans, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, that's what we think in music. But then in film and television, people want to watch a serialized television show. People want to watch Stranger Things for like 3 hours at a time, 5 different seasons. People want to listen to podcasts. Joe Rogan talks to people for 3.5 hours and people listen to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, he'll do something on the Mongols for like 25 hours. People listen to it. I listen to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we arrived in music with the idea that people didn't have attention spans, but it's clearly not true. And I'll be very interested to see, have you gotten any feedback yet from your audience and how they're interacting with this record?
The audience is fucking, like, as far as I could tell, are fucking loving it. Normally every record we've put out, even the more straight ahead ones, there's always some dissenters. Mm-hmm. And I haven't felt that yet. And maybe someone will hear this and be like, "Oh, I'll make sure to pipe up and let you know this sucks." We felt very embraced. And I think like, if I had to guess, I think part of that is because even if you're someone that doesn't like this, even if you're someone that wishes that was just Taylor Goldsmith ballads with like very minimal playing, I think that you could at least tell that we're doing this for the right reasons on our terms. Mm-hmm. So even if it's like, I just feel like if you were hating it, you'd at least have to give it up and say, well, it's what they want. They're being true to themselves. So I respect it. I hope that would be the response. Cause it's a lot different than like, we hired the biggest pop producer. We bought 50,000 synths where everything is like within this amount of time, it's catchy as hell. Then it would be like, well, like you can come at me because I swung for the fences in a cheap way. This is not that. So that's why I think it's been such a warm response. I also think that if you're, it's a not necessarily a big community, but there's a community of like the devoted fan base of any artist, but and Dawes included. And those fans that are like really keyed in, they I don't even think of that surprised. I think that they've been coming to these shows for long enough, and it's like, oh yeah, they do this every night. Now they're just putting it on the album. So in a way for them, it's like, oh, this is an arrival of something I've already been aware of and waiting for. I don't know if I might be wrong about that, but that's the impression that I get. But yeah, I think like what you're saying, what we're saying about short attention spans, that's dictated by radio DJs that need to play 20 songs instead of 15. They need that extra few minutes to fit one more thing in to appease that other radio rep or whatever. And God bless them. I get it. It makes sense. Everyone's trying to make money. Everyone's trying to like get fans. But it's just like, we've never succeeded at the radio game. Why would we continue to try to play a sport that we're not, or try to learn the rules of a sport that we're just not playing?
Right.
Like it's like for us, it's like if there is any success for a Dawes record or failure for a Dawes record, it is not on the merits of radio. Again, we'd love it, and I love it when I see a friends group have a true hit, and we've definitely had a lot of radio love. Mm-hmm. But like our biggest records have had no radio love, and our like smallest records have had the biggest radio songs of relative to our career. Yes. So for us, it's like I don't want to like be thinking about that anymore. Especially with like streaming and playlisting and how all these different ways of how music's getting out there. But like you said, I mean, I remember a few Eminem records back. The first track was 7 minutes. It was awesome. Yeah. I remember when War on Drugs like changed the world of guitar rock in the last few years. Those first two songs, it was like 9 minutes and 7 minutes or something like that, and it was the biggest album in that lane. So I think it's true. I don't think that I obviously hits are always going to need to look a certain way. But in terms of what people respond to, it's just one-on-one with a song. Do I like this or not? I don't think that short attention spans are a factor at all.
Getting better at your instrument is an essential part of being a songwriter. When you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. How do you do that, though? Sure, you can get lessons from the neighbor who majored in the Mixolydian scale at UC Berkeley, but that'll cost you an arm and a leg. Or else you could pull up YouTube and pay nothing at all, but that becomes the ultimate time suck. You'll end up sifting through videos of nerds unironically weeping as they recreate Stevie Ray Vaughan's Texas Flood solo on the ukulele. So what's the sweet spot in between? Peghead Nation, the online home for American roots music. They feature curated video workshops with world-class instructors on guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, dobro, and ukulele. They have levels of instruction that meet the needs of both scrappy upstarts and grizzled veterans. And most importantly, all of it comes in at a low monthly subscription that actual strapped-for-cash songwriters can easily afford. To start taking classes yourself, head on over to pegheadnation.com to check out their 50 available courses. Enter the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get your first month free. You can also send a gift subscription to the songwriter in your life or to the player in your band who needs a not-so-subtle reminder about their playing prowess. Peghead Nation, when you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. Besides just being a straight-up fan of their music, I've always held a particular affinity for Dawes because we started out releasing music around the same time. I feel like I'm in the same graduating class of high school with them or something like that. And as the years go by and different bands fold or just fade away, I find myself rooting for those still standing even more. I was reflecting on that connection and time gone by in my own life and career, and what it feels like to still be standing myself, and it made me think of this wistful poem by Travis Masati, entitled Crossing the Gap. Try asking Ernie Watts, a local bricklayer, to explain how, after a long day of work and league night at the Lucky Strike, he can glide across the kitchen floor, old style hovering like a ghost on his breath, bowling shoes slung over one shoulder, singing Fly Me to the Moon to his wife Cheryl. And when he dips her over the linoleum like it was their first homecoming all over again, ask him to put into words what that sinking is, that shudder in his chest as he notices the wrinkles gathering at the corners of her mouth. He'd rather tell you about the time they rode the tail of the dragon, the year after they'd married, crossing Deal's Gap at the Tennessee state line on his 77 Triumph Silver Jubilee, how they heard talk of a young couple dying on that same stretch of road a week before, and how hard she held on to him that day, curve after potentially deadly curve. Afterwards, in bed, she'll reach for the Virginia Slims on the nightstand. He'll open the windows behind the headboard as a summer breeze creeps past the lithesome curtains. wild grass and honeysuckle mixing with the tobacco. If the drone and flicker of a gathering storm should disrupt the silence of the room, she'll tighten the wingnut of her body behind his, so close that when her lips brush against the nearly imperceptible hairs on the back of his neck, he'll be convinced there is no other life but this. Here's something that's interesting to me. You make your first record with Jonathan Wilson as you're both kind of getting started, right? Now this one, you guys are working together on this. Both you and him, there's been so much water under the bridge, so many projects done at this point. What was it like to reunite and work on this record specifically together?
It felt, I mean, I love him so much. He's one of the greatest people I know. He just got married a couple weeks ago, and we were the band, like backing up whoever came up to sing. His dad sang the song. It was awesome. But one thing I said about him was that, and I hope he wouldn't mind me sharing this, but I think it's really true and it's worth saying. To know Jonathan Wilson is to be looked after, and it doesn't matter who you are. If you've met him and you need to borrow a compressor, or if you're in Dawes, or if you're Father John Misty, or if you're someone's lost dog, like he's just gonna do what he can to make sure that you're getting what you need, and that you're safe, and that you're looked after. And I feel like when Dawes first started, I was 23 when we recorded that album, and I frankly probably a little late. I mean, I think a lot of people might have a sense of their identity a little earlier than that, but I was coming out of a different band that was breaking up, and I think I loved what I loved. We were all desperately in love with the band, and we were desperately in love with Creedence Clearwater, but it was pretty like straight up the middle stuff, you know. Not that I don't love those things still, but our tastes were very streamlined, and I think I didn't know how to record anything, and I think he was sort of like, okay, I see what you guys are trying to do, and I'm going to basically help give you a DNA. It was never said explicitly like that, but that's what happened. And his guidance and his recording and his just his care, I feel like had so much to do with not only how Dawes sounds, but the fact that any of us are professional musicians at all to this day. And so coming back, I mean, you know, and then we did the second record with him. We did our record Passwords with him. The cool thing about this one is that it's in his new space in Topanga Canyon. And it was during the pandemic. And I also think that because of like, we had this like agenda, like we had this idea as to what we wanted. I think that again, don't want to speak for him, but I think it kind of inspired him, especially with like anyone that's familiar with his music. This is really, he's an expert at how to make a song 9 minutes and keep it very interesting. And he's an incredible guitarist. He's an incredible drummer. He's an incredible improvisationalist in all these instruments. And not for nothing, he just finished a global tour as Roger Waters' right-hand man, playing the guitar and singing all the Dave Gilmour parts. So like he had this intimate knowledge of how a song like Shine On You Crazy Diamond is structured. That's going to be helpful to what we're trying to do. And so that all felt like there was no better guy in the world to kind of help captain our ship for this. And it was truly incredible to come back around to it. I mean, his thing is taken off in such a cool way. He finished, he did our record, and then he was working on Misty that whole time. He was working on Angel Olsen. Like Big Thief came in and recorded at his studio. He didn't produce it, but they did it at his studio. So it's just like really, really, the career he's carved out for himself is amazing studio. It's all just, I love that we're a small part of his operations.
Sometimes it can be hard, though, if you start working with someone in, let's say, like your early to mid 20s, and it really begins as kind of like a mentor mentee relationship. Sometimes it can be hard to continue to work with that person going forward because maybe not necessarily the power dynamic has to change, because it doesn't sound like that is a factor in your relationship with him, but definitely like something changes in the relationship because you are no longer the mentee that you were at 23 years old. You know a bunch of stuff now and you're different. So how have you been able to navigate a change like that with someone that you work with so closely?
It's funny. That's a cool thing to ask. I mean, honestly, I think part of why it still works is because I probably haven't grown up and graduated from that thinking maybe as much as I should have. I still am pretty in awe of him. And I still seek his approval in a way that might not really be the healthiest, but it's still like, as a guitar player, I'll finish a solo and like look up at him like, was that okay? You know, like I'm not like standing behind it like a motherfucker the way that I probably should. And yeah, so that's probably a part of it. I do feel respected by him. I do feel like he cares deeply for us, or else, you know, A, we wouldn't be making all these records together. B, we wouldn't be playing his wedding. Like, I know that it's a very intimate relationship, but also he's the kind of producer that you know, I love that. I love all different ends of the spectrum. Like when we worked with Dave Rawlings or Blake Mills, it's very much like, let's grab some acoustic guitars and let's go over every single letter and every word of every line. And with Wilson, it's not like that. With Wilson, it's like, if you believe in your song, I'm basically trusting you to have done that legwork, and I'm gonna make sure your snare drum sounds fucking sick. And so he would kind of cook up these aesthetics, and sure, there were times where it's like, what do you think about this section? Should we like raise the dynamic here? Should we bring it back down? Should we solo over this? Should we leave it alone? And obviously he had all sorts of perspective that was key to making this work. But when it came to certain of those zones that I feel like what you're talking about, that can be the danger zones of like producer songwriter relationships, we just never have gone there together. He's always been so much like, yeah, this shit's great. Let's go. Let's roll. And that's really, it means a lot, because I think that's a big reason why this band still like functions so positively, is because I wouldn't claim that all my songs are good, but no one's ever said no. You know, I think like I that's one thing I love about these, like some bands, like I listen to Queen or something, and not to disparage Queen because I love them, but there's a part of me that's like, you know, you hear like, you're my best friend, or I'm in love with my car. And then you think of Freddie Mercury's crazy genius. And part of me is like, did you really like that song, Freddie? Did you really like You're My Best Friend? Right. But they let it happen. And that song rules for what it's trying to do. And I just think like so many like successful band stories are people always saying yes to each other. Yes. That's something that we might have talked about last time we talked, but when I was trying to do a bunch of co-writing, one guy I was writing with, Mike Viola, who we've written a lot of songs with my wife for her records. He said the coolest thing as a songwriter, and I think your listeners will get a kick out of this, was like when he was sitting down to just start a writing session, we had 0 on the page yet. And he's like, my one rule is that we always say yes to each other, always. And I thought that was so counterintuitive. I'm like, well, our song's going to suck if we just keep yesing each other. But when you really think about it, it is this sort of higher plane, meditative kind of like attitude, where if you write a bad line and you rhyme maybe with baby or whatever it is, that's going to weed itself out because you guys are both in the room and you both trust each other. And it's just going to become clear, like, we didn't get it. That's not it. But so in the meantime, rather than like, if someone makes that realization first, rather than stop the flow of creativity and say, no, that will not be good enough, say, okay, let's put that down. Yes. and move forward. And eventually that stuff always takes care of itself without anyone having ever had to say the word no. And I think the same goes with our band. Like if I write a bad song, that we all just kind of get behind it, and when it's not as good as the rest, it reveals itself.
That's literally the animating principle behind like basic like improvised comedy, is that idea of yes and
yeah, totally.
That's really interesting. I'm a huge fan of someone really hipped me onto his solo work, Mike Viola's solo work recently.
Yeah.
And is that record of his called, is it American Egypt?
Yeah, what an album.
Man, we've been listening to that in the van recently, and I simply can't believe it, man.
It's that good, yeah.
And it ends on that song, Sunset America.
Yeah,
and I've been really blown away. And it's interesting because his music is very like melodically complex and very lyrically complex. So it's interesting to me that his animating principle would just be like, just say yes. You'd think that it would end up in a much more simple, it would distill itself to something more simple if it was just saying yes all the time. But like you're saying, I think it sounds like it leads to a lot more when you're operating.
Yeah, and he's the kind of guy that will record 4 versions of the song, go back to the second one and be like, that was it, I drove past it, that was the one. But yeah, he's a hero. He's so good, and that album's so special. The follow-up, God Muffin, is also equally special. Griffin's playing drums on King Kong Hand, and I always like, that's like to me that's some rarefied air. I'm like, wow, you're on King Kong Hand. That song is, I know, eternal.
That is a lyrically iconic song of last 10 years. It's crazy. So we've kind of talked about how you came to this record from like a bird's eye view desire of what you wanted it to kind of look like. This idea that you wanted it to be, shortly put, maximalist rather than maybe minimalist. What, though, when you finally got down to the writing of the record, so you kind of know what you want the structure to look like, you know the spirit with which you want to attack it, what did the record end up being about?
I think one song kind of led to another in a way that I really liked. I think, and I'm sure as a lot of writers can relate to, once a few songs were there, it kind of helped inspire how to tell the rest of that thought, you know? Like because I was coming into it basically with Everything Is Permanent and Sound That No One Made written lyrically. They came from, I tried Sound That No One Made on Passwords, but it was completely different music, different key, different feel. Okay. It wasn't good. But I always liked the lyric. And same with Everything Is Permanent. We tried that with Good Luck With Whatever. It was this kind of straight poppy kind of sound. It didn't work. So I liked the lyrics, and the music had to completely be thrown out. So I had these 2 sets of lyrics with no music, and I felt like they were talking to each other already. I feel like Everything Is Permanent about the more long-term, broader effects of how social media teaches us to behave. And then Sound That No One Made, a song about how kind of a song about like entropy, like a song about how none of this is exactly one person's fault, and it's not even everyone's fault. It's something that we're all small contributors to, and to start pointing fingers actually will be missing the point, and it might even be counterproductive. It's like more about how do we recognize the mechanisms of the shit we're in, rather than like find some like Big Bang moment. And those 2 songs like I was branching from, and after that it became like, okay, if I'm gonna start writing songs about just in this moment of COVID, I think the first song that we wrote, or that I wrote once the tours got canceled, was Joke in There Somewhere. And that's a song to me that's about how fragile our social agreement is. Like how it doesn't take much for everyone to want to go steal all the toilet paper.
Right.
Like, and I everyone was writing COVID songs pretty quick. I didn't want to talk about being in lockdown. I didn't want it to be this very explicit thing. Not that those songs aren't effective. It's just I was, like, it's like a soldier at war doesn't probably want to listen to war songs in that moment. Like I just was like, I don't want to hear this. So I wanted it to be about it tangentially, or peripherally rather. Like it can just as easily have been written before it, and it would still be true, hopefully. But it was definitely inspired by that feeling of like, here we are going through our day, and these trite observations of hanging out at Target or buying party supplies or getting your coffee in the morning, and there's a joke in there somewhere. Yada yada yada. You get it. So that now with all those three songs happening, it's like, oh, I kind of want to keep going off of that. Like and then that's sort of how this Doomscroller idea happened. When I was writing Someone Else's Cafe, I wanted a title that kind of could speak to the broadness of the tune. If I just called it Someone Else's Cafe, I just felt like, well, there's more to it than just that, and I'd like to somehow point to it. And so then the idea of the Doomscroller being something that I can bring into the attitude of the rest of the songs felt really appropriate. It was actually Griffin, my brother's wife, was like, you should bring that into the record title somehow. It was really, and that like kind of unlocked it all for me and made it all make sense. And because, you know, a song like Ghost in the Machine, it's about the early days of van touring for us and early bands, and it's like that felt like it was factoring in this way of our past obsession or fetishization almost with our phones, whether or not we're taking pictures and texting them to every single person in our contacts, or putting them on our social media accounts, or just scrolling, just like having, you know, you're tired of scrolling everything else, all of a sudden you're just going through pictures from 10 years ago. I just feel like specifically reminiscing has such a big role in our doom scrolling addiction. And so, yeah, I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but that's like, I tried to make it make sense to me in where like they're all kind of telling this part of the story of this moment that we're in, but also at the same time, hopefully not bogging people down. You know, Someone Else's Cafe being very much about the political moment, but also like, how do you recognize those same qualities that you witness in Trump or Putin in yourself, frankly. Yes. With those guys, it seems to like gotten extremely carried away to the point the world is in danger, but it's something that we all have. This need for power that scratched it and never will be fully itched. And it's a matter of how you manage that, not just shaming people that can't.
There's a beautiful book by this monk named Thomas Merton called The Seven-Story Mountain, and it's in the lead up to World War II. And he has the big realization of the book is he tries to look within himself to see what he did in his life to contribute to the world heading into World War II.
That's right? Amazing. What's this called?
It's called The Seven-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton. But that is kind of like a I find that beautiful. I think it's the idea of radical accountability for yourself. And man, I just hearing you talk right there, that's what it made me think of.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's very easy to project, and I do it all the time. You know, I come home and I'm just like, you know, I'm a great husband, and if my wife would just, you know. But it's like, no, man, you know, you got plenty of stuff. But then you can take that out onto the largest level. It's like, yeah, I get it. We can all watch the documentary on Netflix about how social media is so bad and how it's gamifying. Okay. What did you do? Joe, what did you do today? You know, did you put the phone down and watch your kids? Or did you scroll through it? You know what I mean? So. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I like Sound That No One Made being the last song, because it's this, I mean, even in the title, like it's something where it's releasing even just the concept of blame, because that's not what this is about. We're in a certain moment. It's like we're all in this packed elevator and someone ripped a nasty fart and we're dealing with it. And we don't like, we don't have to like start drilling people to find out who did it. It's more just like, how do we get out of this elevator?
Well, with that, I just think that's just such a beautiful analogy to leave it on. Man, I love the record. I love that video, not the video, but like the live recording you guys made of it. I think It's just fantastic. And
Thanks
for taking the time to be on the show, man.
It's always really fun talking to you.
This week's show was brought to you by Banzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Banzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Dawes' latest album is entitled Misadventures of Doomscroller, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.